Walking carefully down the dimly lit corridor of the ship, Chris signals his man to hold their position after noticing someone lying on the floor. Part of his body was visible, hidden from the edge of the wall at the end of the corridor. Chris, with his rifle raised, checked the place carefully as he approached the very slow steps. The place was empty and very quiet. He, as well as his men, were in military equipment, not only for land but for water. They came in from the sea, with the small oxygen tanks attached to their backs. As soon as they boarded the ship, Chris realized that something was wrong. Norman's team was not there, not the security guards, not the members of Veltro, but not anyone. As a precaution, he had double-checked the coordinates that his superiors had sent him. Everything indicated that they were in the right place. Gently squeezing the handle of his rifle, he steps forward and looks at the fallen body. His eyes widen slightly at the sight of the condition. Corpse, one of Veltro's members by the clothes. The body was laying in a pool of blood, the sticky liquid that covered his grayish skin, appearing to have been there for some time. Chris would think so, if it weren't for the infection that spread throughout the poor fellow's body. One of his arms was pure bone. The flesh seemed to have torn off, and what was left of the bones deformed in such a way that his fist resembled the stake. His other arm was huge, and flesh down had grown in the way that was not only unnatural but frightening. The skin looked squashed in the fingers and the sticks of bone sticking out of each of them. Whatever had attacked his men, it only left the upper body from the waist down. There was nothing left, only trails of blood. Chris raised his eyes and searched the place again. This was the work of T. Abyss. No doubt that the ship was not supposed to have an attack. Some accident must have happened, or somehow they all knew the BSAA had been activated to go after them, which made no sense. How would they know about the BSAA's actions? This was a classified mission. He shook his head, leaving those questions for later. He looked back and waved to his men to follow him. The group walked through the empty corridors, and the further they went to the interior of the ship, the more it became evident that the accident had happened, and more bodies were found. At that point, it was safe to imagine the ship had been taken over. Chris to HQ, come in. He communicated over his radio. His eyes focused on the opening duct of something coming out strange. Viscous liquid. He knew about the creatures that were created from the virus, though he had never gone face to face with any of them. Alpha Team report. Something is wrong with the ship. We can't find any crew members. Well, not alive at least, he said, his eyes stopping on a double door ahead. A noise echoed throughout the place, low and muffled, but loud enough for everyone else to hear. I'll report back later. Alpha Team, I'm out, Chris said, waving for his men to follow him towards the door. They looked at the positions. Two men took the right side of the door, one crouching and one just standing up just behind him. Chris did the same with one of his men. One of them put his hand on the doorknob, and everyone looked at him when the door opened a little. Chris signaled his free with his fingers, and as soon as the count was over, the men opened the door quickly, raising his rifle immediately, after the same time as the rest of Chris's team got in position in front of the door. Chris took the lead, his eyes running around the dining room. The place was large, open as a double staircase leading up to the next floor. Candles were lit along with the crystal chandelier on the ceiling. There was food, now cold, on the tables, and it seemed that the place was ready to receive some rather important dinner for people, and it was probably about business. Or some celebration. Who knows? No sign of the cause of the noise, however. Chris signaled his four men to show up the stairs, while another team of three followed him towards another double door ahead. Redfield walked slowly and got into position. This time he would open the doors and signal for his men to get into place. He put his hand on the doorknobs. Just as he was about to open the door, he heard the sound of something breaking, followed by surprised shouts and gunshots. He immediately turned back, his eyes focusing slightly wide towards the situation at the top of the stairs. From there he could see a tall creature holding one of his men in its arms, which was likely two sharp sickles with the stakes for the blade. The creature, at least 2 meters tall, and its skin was grayish and in some parts was completely black. Its head was encased in the thick, that skin that made it look like a shark's head from above. The creature roared and hurled over to the soldier another was shooting at. However, the soldier dodged and crouched. Chris raised his rifle. "Fall back!" he shouted as he put his finger on the trigger. However, before he could do that, the double door behind him was suddenly opened. Chris did not have the time to turn around completely, and his eyes could only see. For a few moments, the creature had entered the place. The creature had a huge bulky arm and saw within a piece of hand. On the right shoulder was a head that looked like more of a cave with sharp serrated teeth. Beside this, its still human head, with still small arms and a dislocated look. The monster must have been bigger than the last one at the stairs. Chris grunted and raised his rifle. However, before he could fire, the creature raised his large arm and tried to strike him. He dodged it as he threw some to the side, hearing one of those noises of gunfire intensify as the group fired at the creature. It was then he all stood up that Chris realized. From the ceiling, ventilation ducts opened. The creature with gray skin and bone piles all over the bodies fell. Oozes he knew they were monsters. The walls moved like entrances to secret hiding places, and the other creatures appeared. From the door front of the steps, the hunters appeared and roared ferociously, rushing at the soldiers. It was clear it was a trap, and they fell for it. He ignored the questions popped into his head, and with the grit of his teeth, he shot an ooze who fell near him, pulling one of his men back when he saw one of the creatures threw a bone stake in his direction. "To the door!" he shouted, backing away as he shot. A trap like that, whoever set it up certainly didn't want to leave any chances left for them to survive. However, that squad was especially trained by Chris. The soldier who had just dodged when his partner was thrown towards him, back when the hunter tried to attack him. He then raised his rifle and shot at the creature. However, that same creature from before, which had both arms in the shape of a sickle, attacked him, trying to cut him in half. The soldier dodged and shot at the creature's leg, causing it to kneel in the stricken leg. He then kicks the creature in the back of the head, causing him to stay in front of the hunter and preventing him from being attacked. He takes one of his stun grenades, and throws it at the creature's feet, covering himself shortly thereafter. "Stun grenade!" he shouted, warning his companions by grabbing a pill from his pocket. The grenade exploded and his sense became disoriented, and he was so close. He became dizzy and was temporarily deaf. He then shook his head and took the pill, feeling his senses return all at once, and immediately ran towards his captain. The other soldiers next to him tried to find a cover. One of them succeeded by jumping off the ladder railing. The other wasn't so lucky, and one of the hunters pierced his back with his claws until they passed through his chest. The soldier who had managed to stay in cover recovered quickly. Beside him he saw an opening ooze and shot at the creature. However, he had widened his eyes when he saw the creature's body swell as if it was about to explode. Not exactly what happened, but from the creature's body, several bone stakes shot out of the direction. The soldier tried to cover himself with his arms in the impact as soon after. He felt 2 stakes pierce the side of his stomach and just before his left shoulder, causing him to grunt loudly in pain and drop his rifle in the process. The soldier staggered back 2 steps and reached for his pistol, an MUP modified greater accuracy. He fired at the ooze, causing the creature to stumble and walked and fell face first into the ground. He then, from his rear pouch, takes out a vial of herbs and drinks it. Feeling relief ran through his body. The man runs towards his captain, but a hunter lands right in front of him and he tries to attack him with its claws. A vertical attack, if it didn't kill him, it would leave him severely wounded. The man dodges the attack by throwing himself forward and letting himself slide onto the ground, causing the hunter to literally pass above him. He stands up and turns around, shooting the hunter with his pistol. The creature, despite it being hit with the shots, didn't even seem to mind the pain, as if it didn't feel it, despite the certain damage done to its body. The soldier's eyes widened when its pistol ran out of ammo. On his side, another hunter was running towards him. The man looked to the side just in time to dodge another attack from the other hunter, turning his body to his side, and with the momentum of his movement, hitting a kick to the back of the creature's head. Another hunter attacked him and he had jumped back, grabbing a grenade from his belt. He tosses the grenade on the ground and coughs a little as thick smoke covers him completely. The hunters tried to chase him into the smoke away. However, the creatures roared when the smoke hit their thick skins and retreated, as if it was in great pain. The soldier ran in that time, after struggling to reload his pistol with incendiary bullets. He turns and shoots at the smoke-covered ground. A spark that the bullet just created ignited the smoke with the explosion of flames that took place, forming a wall of fire that engulfed the two hunters. He finally made it to the door. Chris watched all the chaos that unfolded in a matter of moments. Of the 7 men who had just accompanied him, only 3 were alive as far as he could count. 2 were already through the door, 1 was still trying to reach him. Chris gritted his teeth and ran towards the last living soldier. He was still trapped between the 2 oozes that the huge creature saw in this place of hand. He shot at the ooze as he ran. The soldier shot towards the large creature that attacked him quickly. Despite his size, the thing could move without much difficulty. Before Chris could reach him, however, that another creature with sickles with arms jumps towards him. He widened his eyes and jumped to the side, coming face to face with the hunter preparing to attack him. Chris stuck the blade into that was attached to the end of his rifle below the hunter's neck and had kicked it in the side of the leg, causing the creature to lose its balance and fall to its knees. Repositioning himself, Chris then stabs a knife into the creature's head with the blade on his rifle, realizing it quickly to fire and shot at the creature. The monster, however, didn't seem to feel the shots. Its thick skin made a good armor against his bullets. The creature moved its arm back to attack him, and Chris dodged it by ducking. The monster tried to move its blades towards Chris, but the soldier rolled to his side and shot the creature in the head when he saw his arm had been stuck for some time on the ground. But Chris had managed to dodge again and an oncoming attack from behind. He stood up soon after, only to be surprised by an ooze right behind him. However the shots were fired, the ooze was hit and staggering backwards when the shots had hit its head. Chris glanced briefly at the soldier who had just helped him. He was still surrounded but still managed to gap between to help his captain. Chris nodded and focused his eyes on the thick-skinned creature, that this again leading to his direction. At the same time on his side, the monster he saw on its arm was also going to attack him, along with 2 hunters. Chris also shot the first hunter while running towards the saw monster. The hunter falls to the ground just as the last bullet from its clip hit it. Chris had grunts loudly and turns his head to gaze the second hunter, too close for him to be able to pick up his pistol and shoot. The creature attacks him, but Chris deflects it by throwing his torso back and counters with a strong punch to the face. Then he kicks off the hunter's side leg and delivers a bottom elbow to the creature's head. The 2 large monsters move closer together. Chris took a deep breath, and a short count appeared in his head. The instant he saw that the monster attacked him, he swerved onto the side and hit the monster with its psyche arms, cutting its body in half. Meanwhile, with his pistol, Chris shoots at the ooze near his shoulder and reaches him, helping him move, and he had a bone stake in his chest, as well as cuts on his arms and legs. He was injured, and the stake was at his chest was worrisome. With the medical equipment, he might be okay. That's if they could get through that. The monsters had turned around and was staring at them both. The creature, broken in half, was still moving, as if both top and bottom had been their own life. Spines came out of each part, as well as limbs that they were used to moving around. At least 3 hunters were still around. "You're fucking kidding me," he complained. Things were not looking good for them. Straightening the shoulder on his shoulder, Chris takes his 2 grenades from his belt and puts a pill in his mouth. He tossed one in different directions, one at the hunters, and the other 2 at the creatures ahead. The grenades exploded at the same time, and flashes of blind light blinded everyone in the room. Chris recovered quickly and swallowed the pill, as his eyes widened by a sudden surge of adrenaline coursing through his veins. Shots were heard, and the soldiers were at the doorway. They were shooting at the monsters on their path, and Chris moved. He ran as fast as he could towards the door. The hunter in front of him tried to attack him, clumsily staggered by the grenade, but the soldier Chris carried raised his pistol and fired at the creature, causing it to fall in front of the Redfield, who kicked the hunter in the head as hard as he passed. He saw the creature roared, and he didn't hear heavy footsteps approaching behind him. One of the soldiers threw a fragmentation grenade right behind Chris, and moments before he was reached by the creature, the grenade exploded, causing it to stagger from the impact of the roar of pain from having its flesh literally blown from its body. "Come on!" he shouted, as he reached for the door, hearing the soldiers closed it after, and started running down the empty hallway. The creatures could still chase them. That was clear, especially the surviving hunters. Not to mention it was more possible that there were other creatures around the ship, and they would at great risk of being invulnerable now. They had to get out of there fast. "Alpha Team to HQ, come in!" Chris shouted through his radio, feeling his soldier and his arms begin to grow weaker and his weight to be heavier to bear. He needed immediate medical attention or he would die. "HQ to Alpha Team, report." The neutral voice of the man on the other end of the line made Chris curse him every possible way as he was in frustration. "The ship's infested," he shouted. "There are too many infected. I've lost more than half my men," he said, waiting for contact from HQ, which did not come. The radio was silent. Complete silence. He couldn't hear static, as if someone disabled his device. "What the fuck?" he shouted indignantly, hearing the creatures approaching behind him. Another soldier was wounded, with bone stakes driven to his body. "Captain, the herbs!" he said. From his rear pouch, Chris took a mixture of herbs and forced the soldier in his arms to drink. Well, a wound that would soon needed to be treated before his bone to be removed from his chest, but those herbs would save his life for now. They ran for some time more, until they reached the door and had used to enter. However, much to the soldiers' dismay, the iron door was locked. "Aw, shit," Chris grumbled, hearing the creatures closer. It was a frickin' trap. "They were coming!" Chris shouted, in anger, before becoming more and more evident in his words. It didn't make sense. It'd be too conditional for all the monsters to show up like that, let alone for that door to be locked. Someone had to warn them that they were coming, and the list of people who knew about the mission was extremely short. "They sent us to die, motherfuckers!" Chris shouted, punching the wall. His men were well trained, and if they had gone expecting something like that, they certainly would have come out alive, and he was for sure of that. But to be caught in a surprise like that. "Captain, this way!" one of his men said. At the end of the corridor, he was trying to open a locked door, while another pointed his gun only at the creatures to get there. "I think I can open that." Chris walked over near him and placed the man on his arms on the floor, looking at the situation analytically for a few moments. "Make it certainly fast. We'll cover you," Chris said, grabbing some medical equipment from the man's rear pouch on the floor. "The herbs will inhibit the pain, but you're gonna bleed a lot. I need you to take a deep breath, okay?" Chris said, placing one of his hands on the bone stake driven into the soldier's chest, and looking at him deep in the eyes. Okay, right," the man said. After a nod, Chris prepared to remove the bone. However, before he could even do that, some of the compartments from the wall were opened, and from them, almost invisible gas seemed to be emanated. Chris stood up quickly, looking at it with wide eyes, putting his clothes over his nose almost immediately. But it was done. He felt his throat go numb. He felt his nostrils go numb, and the more he breathed, the more he felt his body light. "Captain, I need help here," the soldier said, and Chris walked over to him, coughing a few times as he walked groggily. Once he reached to the door, he leaned on the wall and could feel his conscience leaving him. He knew how messed up it would be if it happened. But it was inevitable, and moments later the soldiers blacked out, and the door they'd been trying to break down was now opened. Jill and Parker watched the huge ship that they were approaching. They were in a small boat provided them by the BSAA. The ship had its lights on, giving them a good view of the deck above. It was certainly empty, but there was no sign of Chris and his men. Jill looked at Parker, who nodded, and then walked to her side, and both had fired hook shots across the bow and climbed onto the ship. As soon as they were on board, they raised their pistols. Parker had a shotgun on his back, and Jill had a sniper rifle. Soon they ran their eyes over the upper deck. Nothing. They needed the iron door just ahead to get into the position. Parker slowly opened the door, and as soon as it was opened wide enough, Jill entered, taking a lead and pointing her gun at the empty room. The first thing they saw as they entered the room were bodies trapped in broken ventilation ducts. The bodies were in much more deplorable state, and it was clear that the biological weapons were there had played with their prey before they had died. A strange black liquid was dripping from some sorts of these ducts. They ignored the horrible smell that covered the whole room and went to the next door, a corridor lead ahead, turning to the right away for a few meters away. The pipes on the ceiling were destroyed, and some looked as if they had been destroyed from the inside out, as if some creature had emerged from those ducts and were now prowling the area. And from the footprints on the floor, along with bloodstains, that was exactly the case. Jill signaled for Parker to be careful, and they continued down the corridor. Up ahead, they too saw destroyed elevators, and a body laying just below the blood-dripping duct. Jill felt a bit anxious, feeling the uneasiness in her chest. They turned left and made their way to the end of the corridors. The place was silent, and this only made them more anxious. They reached the cafeteria and turned on their flashlights. The place was dark and the lamps were broken, and a horrible smell emanated from somewhere. They continued walking down the long, empty corridors until after some time walking, they came upon an iron door with a small glass window that allowed them to see the inside of the locked room. "Chris!" Jill called out to him as she saw a man tied to the chair with his back to the door. The man was huge, about Chris's size, and the hairstyle only proved to see that it was his partner. They looked around. He was taken prisoner? Why? Where were the rest of his men? All things considered, it was not strange to think that they had planned to infect him. Then why hadn't they already done so? "The door's locked," Parker said, and Jill turned to the man and opened the bag which she was carrying. From there, she grabbed some kind of blowtorch and a lockpick case. "Who do you think I am?" Jill said rhetorically, and Parker shrugged, holding up his hands. "Take it easy. Not all of us can break into any lockpick that comes in our way," Parker said, standing 2 steps behind Jill, checking her surroundings as she worked on breaking down the door. It took a while, but the door opened with a bit of force. Jill stood up and signaled for Parker, stowing the items back in his bag and grabbing her gun. They both entered the room with Jill taking lead. Parker began to investigate the scene as the men walked over to Chris. As soon as she approached, she placed one of her hands on Chris's shoulder. The slight movement from the head caused his head to fall to the ground, startling them both. What was their surprise is when they both saw it was actually a doll. "What the?" Parker asked. It was the instant they heard something beep. An explosion happened. The two tried to keep their balance as the ground shook, until the ground beneath them gave way completely, causing them to fall free to the area below. Something roared in the same instant they hit the ground. They grunted in pain but quickly recovered. Jill illuminated the scene with her flashlight while Parker stared at the direct destruction above him. "Jesus, you didn't step on anything you could have caused that, did you?" he asked. But after a few moments passed with no response from Jill, he looked over at her, only to find her eyes gazed over at something in that room. He turned and pointed his gun at the direction Jill was looking at, only to find a monster, or the beginnings of one. It was a woman. Her long blonde hair was right in front of her eye and down part of her neck. Her grayish slimy skin showed the infected red veins. Something similar to her tentacles encircled on her right leg. Her feet became sharp sickles and turned backwards, and her hands and claws instead of nails, and her left arm with the stakes of bone all over it. She was standing still, just staring at them. If it weren't for the slight awkward of movement she made for the remaining standing, they wouldn't believe she was alive or undead. "Rachel?" he said, with no one as specific. Jill stared at him. "Friend of yours?" she asked, also with her gun raised towards the woman, not knowing exactly whether to back off or open fire at once. "No, she's partnered with the rookie, Raymond from both FBC. They were sent to investigate one of Veltro's ships, but not this one. They were not supposed to be here," Parker explained, and before Jill could say anything else, what was left of Rachel moved. "I feel a meal for me," she said, in a paused and drawn-out manner, but almost in a sing-song voice mixed with the voice of a monster, the abyss taking over her body. "She talks?" Parker exclaimed. He had never met a BOW could talk to Jill, on the other hand, but had no one cloud to formulate the complete sentence. "That was a different mutation, Unique?" Rachel attacked. She leapt towards the wall, picking up the momentum, leapt towards Jill with her claws pointed forward, intended to pierce the woman's body. Jill dodged as she jumped to the side, and Parker fired at the same instant Rachel landed on next to him, and as she backed away, sneaking a distance. However, that monster was fast. Before Parker could move away, she attacked him with the back of the right arm, hitting him on the full side with the side of his body, throwing him next to the side, causing him to fly through the air until he collided with some empty boxes, the place and locker in the corner. "Parker!" Jill shouted his name, shooting towards Rachel, who seemed to have care of her little and had moved in great speed towards where Parker had fallen. She had planned to kill him first. Jill had grunted as she realized that she had ran fast as she could towards the creature. Rachel raised her arm to kill the one man. However, Jill got there first and hit a lock drop kick straight at the creature, causing Rachel to stagger to the side. The BSAA agent looked up, and her partner fell on the ground. He was coughing a little, and he had a cut on the side of his torso. "Parker, are you okay?" she asked, helping him to his feet, realizing how difficult it was going to be for him to do so. "Damn, I feel like she broke my ribs," he said, picking up the shotgun that was on his back, pointing the gun at the creature, which attacked again. Jill fired as she backed away, but her bullets didn't seem to have much effect, even though they hit her target. The moment Rachel got close enough, Parker pulled the trigger of his shotgun. The bullet struck the creature squarely in the face, causing Rachel to move away abruptly. She screamed with a mixture of a human and monstrous voice. "That hurts!" she roared. Half of her head split open at the huge tongue, which looked like a round tentacle, with a hole at the base with sharp teeth that the hole emerged, swinging wildly as she agonized over pain. The shot had scattered what was left of the creature's human face. Rachel roared again and ran towards them both. Parker fired again, and this time Rachel ignored the pain of the shot and attacked him, hitting him in the stomach, causing him to fly backwards, being dragged on the ground for more than a few moments due to the force of the attack, dropping the shotgun in the process. Rachel turned to Jill and attacked her with her left arm. The woman dodged as she crouched down, was a bit surprised when the creature grabbed her by the neck with its right arm, and lifting her into the air. Again, half of Rachel's head was open and its tongue emerged, probably tried to infect Jill or devour her flesh. The woman put her legs around the arm that held her and loosening the grip on her neck a bit, and shot against the tongue until it reattached. Rachel roared and dropped her to the ground at the same time. Jill grabbed a grenade. However, the creature kicked Jill in the stomach, throwing the woman a feet back, being dragged until she hit her back against the wall. Jill gasped from the blow. Her eyes were open and her saliva spewed from her mouth. Although she was not hit by the blades present at the creature's feet, a stake was present in front of her, piercing her belly. Blood dripped from her wound, but she ignored the pain, threw the grenade at Rachel's feet. The grenade exploded before the creature could do anything else. Rachel roared out louder than ever, one of her legs giving away as her flesh was being destroyed by the blast. But that didn't stop the creature from crawling away and climbing next to an air duct where it retreated. Jill and Chris and Parker got up with some difficulty. The woman grunted with a spasm of pain and leaned against the wall. "What the hell? You okay?" Parker asked, approaching her staggering steps. That thing was too strong. "Yeah, it's not that bad," Jill said, returning to her seat, pulling some items out of her back pouch. She placed some bandages over her feet and picked up a small bottle of saline with the BSAA symbol on the bottle. "You better heal up as fast as you can. We don't know when she'll be back," Jill said, taking a few deep breaths and pouring the saline over her wound. It stung, but there was a herbal compression that mixed to ease the pain and speed up the healing process, so she would not need to drink the herbal mixture she had, at least not yet. She quickly took the bandages and began to cover the wound. nodding at the purple spots that had spread across Parker's torso. "It doesn't look like I broke anything, but it certainly cracked my ribs," Parker said, feeling his chest hurt a little every time he took a breath. Well, in this case, there was no way. He took the herbal mixture from his back pouch and drank, feeling the mixture act immediately to his body. They had a deadly hatred for Umbrella, of course, but this was one thing that they had them to thankful for, and that was the research on those herbs. The quality of life improved dramatically, not only to shorten again with the appearance of those viruses. What kind of mutation was that? Parker asked himself, getting up quickly and reloading his weapons. We never gotten that information from BOSWS like her. Jill then stood up as well, feeling her wound hurt but much less than before. "I don't know. I'm just confused as you are," she said, looking at the hole that they had fallen through a few moments. That was no coincidence. Parker turned to her as for her to say, "Someone was waiting for us. They know we're here. That doll is a decoy," Parker confirmed, pointing at the doll lying on the ground not far from there. "Not many people know about this operation." Jill shook her head, agreeing. And Chris would never have revealed any information, not to know that he didn't know we'd be the ones to come, Jill said. And he should have already suspected the BSAA would send a rescue team or something similar, Parker replied. Even so, he would never open his mouth, she said, looking away, making her way towards the destroyed door not far from there. The door was iron. This was only proved so strong Rachel had become in her mutation. They arrived in the room with glass wall in front. Although the broken glass, they could see open capsules. Capsules that were probably meant to hold BOWS they had, or something. They had turned and left and went through a wooden door. They had blinked in surprise when they saw that the wall had reached, and they were on the second floor. Both ancients walked to the railing in front of them and looked down. On the floor below there was a staircase leading down to the bottom of the hall, and on the wall not far from there, they could see a sign that read, "Casino." "This place is huge. How are we going to—" "I found you." Rachel's melodious voice seemed to echo through the hall. She had said it in a brief singing, as if she had been playing hide and seek. They both turned towards the voice, and already raising their weapons, they saw her coming out of one of the air ducts above. What surprised them both was that she had come back so quickly, but that she was fine. There were no other bullet that had caused earlier, as if she had completely regenerated. Before neither of them could do anything, Parker is suddenly attacked by a hunter, who throws himself in his direction. He widens his eyes and places his shotgun in front of his body to form as protection. He grunts when the hunter bites the gun. He screams slightly as he felt his body being thrown backwards by the force of the creature. They both fell from the railing to the floor below. Parker's luck was that all he fell over the hunter's body, cushioning his fall. "Parker!" Jill shouted his name, but there was not much she could do. Since Rachel attacked her, she tried to pierce her with the stakes present in her arm, but the woman deflected as she ducked and counterattacked with the kick to the stomach, causing Rachel to step back, thus making it impossible for her to shoot at that monster. However, just as before, Rachel seemed to have simply ignored the shots and attacked again. She moved her jumps towards Jill, and still in the air, spun her body around and tried to cut the woman with their sickle-shaped blades on the back of her feet. Jill dodged and jumped back, taking as much distance as she could, firing back. The tentacles around Rachel's legs moved towards Jill, who whined her eyes and grunted slightly as she felt her left thigh and right arm being grabbed. She had reached for the knife that was at her waist and slashes at both tentacles, just in time to dodge a stab coming from Rachel. Jill ducked, still taking advantage of the momentum, jumped back, hitting the spinning kick at the creature, causing it to move away and giving it an opportunity to fire once more at the shot. But nothing was easy. The hairs on the back of her neck stood up as she heard the sound of a hunter rapidly approaching behind her, making her eyes widen. She turned around, trying to shoot at the hunter before he got any closer, but it was too close, and the only thing she could do was try not to get pierced by the creature's own claws. She fell backwards and her gun was thrown violently from her hand. The hunter landed a few feet behind her. Jill visualized in detail what happened next, but as soon as she saw her on the ground, Rachel raised her arm to attack her. Jill tried to grab her gun, but she wouldn't be fast enough. But before Rachel could attack her, she blinked in surprise and saw a kick to the side of the creature's neck with the extreme force, throwing her now to her side so hard that it caused her to crash into the wall and fall to the floor next to her. The gunshot was heard, the magnum by the noise. The hunter's head exploded into thousands more pieces. Jill blinked a few more times, confusion taking over. Her eyes widened at the mask of the skull in front of her. The man was tall, wearing a military black outfit with no apparent symbol. A tactical vest on his torso was also black. He was wet, which indicated that he came from swimming. In his hand, a magnum in the holster to his right thigh, another pistol, a knife to its sheath beside his shoulder. She didn't know who he was, no symbol of any parent organization, but considering that there were numbers of FBC around, she assumed he'd be part of it as well. But why the mask? "Stay sharp," the man said, his rough voice causing Jill to snap out of her thoughts. She looked over and saw Rachel standing up once again. Jill quickly stepped away and reached for her gun. At the same time, the man was shooting the magnum onto the infected woman's head. Rachel roared in pain as she felt her head simply explode with the impact. The strange tongue emerged again, only to be shot by bullets fired at Jill. The creatures began to struggle and with every inch tried to get away from there. It was as if its legs had a life of its own. Ignoring the pain, it began to run towards the nearest duck. The man seemed to realize this as he shot Rachel in the legs before she could reach the duck, causing the creature to fall. Jill, remembering that Rachel could crawl at great speed, grabbed another grenade and ran to the creature with her knife. She stabbed the tongue of Rachel's head and threw the grenade into the hole that seemed to serve as a throat. Then she kicked Rachel away and took cover as the creature exploded from the inside out. Blood, flesh, and a few other things she couldn't identify and didn't want, all splattered all over the floor, and what was left of Rachel remaining fallen motionless. Jill was panting slightly, her eyes wanting to make sure that the creature stayed on the ground, and after a few moments passed with nothing happening, she relaxed a little. The woman then turned to the masked man. He reloaded his gun in his hand and placed it on the holster of his left leg. "Thanks for the help. I didn't think there would be any FBC agents around here," she said, moving a few steps closer, but staying a certain distance away. The man looked at her. His blue eyes were cold, and although they looked at her, they didn't seem to want her there. Before he could say anything, however, the whole floor shook. Jill staggered and held on the railing. It wasn't just the hall. It was the whole ship. Her eyes fell on Parker and the floor below. She was standing over the hunter's body with pistol in hand, and apparently fine. A frightening roar echoed, something that had woken up. A noise of destruction echoed loudly, and the floor shook again. Jill and Parker looked at each other and nodded. She turned to the man, however, blinking in a few steps that he had disappeared. She hadn't seen him that move. "Jill doesn't sound very good. We better go." Parker's voice caught her attention. After a small sigh, she goes to meet her partner, not noticing the slowly regenerated body just behind her.